welcome to the Green Affair, to our lecture series. Our third lecturers today are coming to us out of the city, I guess. That's where you hail from? Where do you hail from? From Brooklyn? From Brooklyn and Jersey City. Okay, very nice. So I'm Greg Madison. I'm the chair of the Green Team. The Green Team and the Climate Action Committee sponsored the event that you are here taking part in today, so thank you for coming. That is a volunteer committee, so if anyone is interested in volunteering to join the Green Team, there is a sign-up sheet right inside the door there at the first table that you encounter when you go in right next door. So we'd love to have more members to our committee. If you haven't done so, make sure you sign in and get a raffle ticket and put your raffle ticket in for any of the prizes that we have over there. We'll be drawing for those prizes after the fair, and we'll notify you via whatever contact information you have on the back of your ticket. And there's no limit on how many times you can enter. You just come to see another lecture and you'll get another ticket to increase your odds of winning. So please take advantage of that. I also want to thank Whole Foods for sponsoring our fair for the second year in a row. Their generous contribution really makes all of this possible. So thank you to Whole Foods. So our speakers, Jersey City-based artist Anne Percoco studies the interface between nature and culture, recontextualizing overlooked and undervalued places, plants, and materials. For the past 10 years, she has produced public artworks, gallery shows, web-based projects, and publications, both nationally and internationally. And she is joined by an artist and educator based in Brooklyn, New York, Ellie Irons, works in a variety of media, from walks to Wi-Fi to gardening, to reveal how human and non-human lives intertwine with other Earth systems. Recent work focuses on plants, people, and urban ecology, and in the so-called Anthropocene. So I'm sure we're going to find out what exactly that means in just a second. So please welcome our speakers, Anne and Ellie.
Okay, hi. Thanks so much for having us here today. I'm Ellie.
Anne.
And we're going to be kind of tag teaming this. We'll start out by telling you a little bit about each of our individual practices, because we both were independent artists before we figured out we both had some common interests and started the Seed Library together. So I am an interdisciplinary artist and educator, as was said in my bio, and I'm really connected to the discipline of ecology. I studied environmental science as an undergrad, and that continues to wind its way into my work. But I live in a place that looks most of the time kind of like this. Like the most wild I can find is kind of a decomposing parking lot. Been living in Brooklyn for about 10 years. And that adjustment, I came from a rural background, has forced me to start figuring out a way to live in a place where most of the dirt that I see during the day will be on the side of the road in a sack. The plants are growing out of a sidewalk crack. And it was really hard for me when I first moved to the city, because I just thought of it as not having nature. And being someone who's so interested in ecology, was here for art school, it's like, how am I going to make this work? That started to change when I started this project, which is called Invasive Pigments. I started about 5 years ago. And for it, I harvest the leaves, flowers, and fruit of wild-growing urban species. And I make them into watercolor paint. So this forced me to get to know the places where plants grow in urban spaces. I make paintings about the plants that I harvest from, and I also teach others how to do the same. We go on walks together. I do workshops about how to paint and connect other people to their local habitat. These are a few of the pigments that I've made. There's about 35 overall. This is a display case for them. And then I also make maps that kind of document how these plants have come to be where they are. So it's a little hard to see up there, but there's actually a pink wash over a lot of this, and that's showing where pokeweed, which is a plant that's considered native. To us, native means, Anne and I in our project, that just the fact that the plant was here maybe pre-European contact. So this is a plant, pokeweed, that would have been around when Lenni Lenape people were working the land. And The blue pigment, which is also a little hard to see, is from a plant called Asiatic dayflower, which is from Southeast Asia originally, but now lives in New York City. So both of these plants live together. Pokeweed has switched and gone to live in Europe as well, so there's a lot of kind of interchange of plants going on due to human activity. This is another of my projects called the Sanctuary for Weedy Species. It's a place for weedy life forms, be they plants or humans, to hang out and get to know each other. For this project, I collected more than 300 wild plants from the streets of New York City, and I focused specifically on places where their habitats were about to be destroyed, so mostly like construction sites and places where people were working to develop the land. And I moved the plants to a gallery. They grew there for 3 months, and then eventually they became a temporary green roof on an abandoned building in Crown Heights. This was an exhibition space at the time. But Brooklyn's gentrifying rapidly, as I'm sure you've heard, and spaces like this one are disappearing really rapidly. So these kind of DIY weedy spaces where artists hang out and do their thing, and places where these plants like to hang out are disappearing as property values rise. So while the, my video gonna start? There should be a video here. There we go. So while the sanctuary existed on this rooftop, I was monitoring it via a webcam so people could log in and see what the plants were doing, because not everyone could get to the roof. And so I watched the plants grow and change over a period of months, and I started thinking about how plants adapt to their landscapes. So I was doing a little research, and I came across a place called the International Laboratory for Plant Neurobiology. This place is in Italy, in Florence, at the University of Florence, and they had this description of their work with plants on their website. This is in their About Us section, and I'll read you a quote. Plants are dynamic and highly sensitive organisms that actively and competitively forage for limited resources, both above and below ground. They accurately compute their circumstances, use sophisticated cost-benefit analysis, and take defined actions to mitigate and control diverse environmental insults. Plants are capable of a refined recognition of self and non-self and are territorial in behavior, end quote. So whether this evolving field should be called plant neurobiology or not is up for debate. People argue, hey, plants don't have neurons. Regardless, we're learning a lot more, at least in the world of Western science, about the fact that plants have behavior. They have agency, they can take action in the world. And that forces us to kind of rethink what the meaning of vegetative is, right? This kind of idea of the dead, the not moving, the unable to have agency. To me, the plants that I interact with in Brooklyn are an active force in the world. They have agency, they can construct and inhabit their environments. So what is life like for my urban dwelling plant neighbors? It's a little tough in Brooklyn. Cities of the scale we see today haven't been around very long. A common statistic is that 66% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050. That's versus 3% only 200 years ago. So this is changing really, really rapidly. So this is an open lot in northeast Brooklyn, near where I've spent about 10 years. It's experiencing cycles of growth and mowing and regrowth, and this happens year after year. So this ongoing cycle actually keeps this pocket of open earth in a state of perpetual renewal, and this kind of renewal favors a certain kind of plant, a fast-growing, light-loving pioneer species type of plant. It also selects for plants that can adapt their growth form easily, because as this mowing pressure comes again and again, a plant like pepperweed will change its form. So on the left-hand side, you see a plant that's growing up against the fence, out of the reach of the mower's blades, and then on the right is this really dense, balled-up growth form that grows in the middle of the field where the mower hits again and again. So the images I've been showing you are all from another ongoing project called Feral Landscape Typologies. And I've been using this project to document where these plants live since I need them for my projects. And it's turned into kind of a survey. And it's helped me get to know these landscapes because I'm going back to them repeatedly. So often described as empty or vacant, to me these patches of open earth are actually the most lively parts of the city. They're filled with all manner of non-human living things. And a really big proportion of them are of the variety that turns sun into food. Miraculous. They also break up impervious surfaces, stabilize and build soil, mitigate the urban heat island effect, which is a big problem in New York City. They cool the air. Reduce stormwater runoff, also a huge problem in New York City given our combined sewer system. And they capture airborne pollutants, which is also huge in a place with lots of cars. And finally, there's some early studies coming out to say that they might even aid human mental health by providing kind of a subliminal experience of green space that can be calming. And additionally, as may be obvious, all of these plants that are greening the city are doing it without being intentionally placed there by us or intentionally maintained by us. Peter Del Tredici has a field guide on this topic, and he has described these plants as spontaneous urban plants, also known as weeds. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anne, who will talk a little bit about how her artistic process led her to plants and weeds.
Thanks, Ellie. So for my artwork, I'm interested in questions of value, like when do we assign value or worth to something, and when do we think that it's should be gotten rid of? So I've worked with different like trash, water bottles, food wrappers. I'm interested in vacant lots, much like Ellie, and that's how I found my way to working with weeds. So this is a double-sided accordion book that I created at a residency in the Netherlands called Window Plants. And on one side is pictures of weeds from an unkempt outdoor public space with the window blind that I had my friend hold up behind the plant to kind of frame it to let us see its shape and everything. And then on the bottom is a picture of an office building that was across the street from the residency. And it had all these tiny little cactuses in the window. So just the contrast of the domesticated and less domesticated nature and with the frame of a window. This is a project that I did in India in 2014 in Thane, outside of Mumbai, for an art festival there, and it's called the Census of Weeds. And I worked with a group of high schoolers to take exactly that, a census of the weeds in one small area. So so they drew pictures, took measurements, and then we made basically a Tumblr with all of their findings and images. And then also in Thane, the government made the census of trees and painted these really bright stripes on the trees that had already been counted. So we did something similar with the little weeds. So here's a picture of the Tumblr, and also made the QR code tags which directed you to the website. This is a project I did in Jersey City called Terrarium, where I collected weeds from the park across the street. I was working with a group of volunteers who every Saturday would pull up the weeds, but instead of pulling them up and threw them away, I would save as many as possible, and I replanted them in this repurposed shipping container that has windows on it. So the pink is grow lights, and I took care of them and tended them for 2 months during the summer. And this was before I knew Ellie. So here's, this was like a huge project, lots of labor required, and I had a lot of help. So here's just some pictures of the process. And then to sum up the project at the end, and as to have a kind of ephemera or souvenir from the project, I made these little seed packets. At the end of the project, a lot of the plants were starting to produce seeds. I did this wheat pasting project in South Orange a few years ago, where I took a detailed photograph of weeds from their downtown area, and then using Photoshop, I blew them up really big, printed them out, and cut them out, and then wheat pasted them onto the sides of buildings in the town center. So sort of playing with the scale and relationship to architecture seems a little bit post-apocalyptic. Okay, so now we come to the Next Epoch Seed Library.
Cool. So a lot of that work that Anne was talking about and that I was doing, we were doing independently, and then I guess we knew of each other online, and I invited Anne to come be part of a panel about plants and weeds, and shortly thereafter we hatched the idea of the Seed Library, and that was a couple years ago. So the Seed Library is a artist-run public access collection of novel, adaptable, and spontaneous seeds for the Anthropocene age. And we're going to show a video in just a second. Before I do that, I just wanted to know how many people have heard of the word Anthropocene. Is this something a few of you have heard of? Cool. I always ask this question because it's still a kind of neologism, if you were, a new word that's making its way around. And so every time I give a lecture, I like to know how many, what portion of the audience has heard of it. From my perspective, it's this concept that humans have made such a huge impact on the landscape that we might be creating a new geologic age, right? For the last 10,000 years, we've been in the Holocene, which means the wholly recent age, and things have been very temperate, and the ice receded, and we've been able to farm and make our big civilizations, and now all the plastic and elevated CO2 levels and pollutants and bits of radioactivity, et cetera, are being laid down in the rock layers and might be visible in like 500,000 years. Geologists are arguing about this right now, and they're not sure if they want to accept this, but in the meantime, artists and scholars and writers and people have gotten fascinated by this idea and started using it. I usually say so-called Anthropocene because there's other ideas that it could be called like the Capitalocene or the Plantationocene or the Thulacene, which is a whole other thing. So people are arguing about it, but it is this idea that we're in the age of human impact. So with that, we're going to play a short documentary video. It's like 7 minutes, something like that. Yeah, made by an awesome artist and friend of ours named Candace Thompson. I think. The native versus invasive question is a huge conversation.
A lot of people ask us about that. A lot of people who are environmentalists, as we are.
Huh. There's a lot more of this grass here. I might get some more of it since, or maybe just another photo even. So it's a little easier to see what it is. Our whole project is to break down that binary and start thinking about context and looking at each individual plant in each individual situation rather than making a blanket decision that because this is not native, it should not be inaccurate.
Yeah,
Big one.
very clearly we say that we position ourselves between the hardcore seed banks, like the one in Svalbard, between that and like community seed saving for garden purposes.
What Svalbard is saving mostly is food crops and crops that are obviously useful to humans. So we're wondering what kind of genetic diversity is being left out if you're not saving the seeds of wild crop cousins or something like that.
This must
Yeah.
be wild mints.
Ooh,
Yeah.
totally. Oh, let's get that.
big common threads has been being interested in materials and places that are undervalued or are thought to have like no value or negative value.
And then getting fascinated by their stories because it turns out so many of them are from different places and have these kind of interesting ways that they've arrived in the United States and particularly in the Northeast and kind of reflect the cosmopolitan nature of the city.
Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, much maligned as a invader. It spreads rhizomatically underground, so all these plants are probably clones of each other and connected by a network under the soil. But it's also has a huge history as being medicinal and it's kind of really meaningful plant. Technically, you're not allowed to forage. Like this is illegal, and I think originally that law was in place to keep people from ransacking the parks. But when you're talking about like plants that the city's going to pour poison on instead.
We do point out, oh, this plant is edible, this one is medicinal, dog bane can be used to make rope. And I think that that's great and it gives people a way in, but also like a weed is just like an amazing creature in its own right.
They're living things and we're trying to think what the label is that we're going to put on the plants that humans haven't found a use for. Like maybe that's awesome that this plant exists, lives with us, thrives with us, and we have to figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
10,000 years ago, the site where we're gathering all these plants was under a glacier. 200 years ago, it was a salt marsh. And now it's an ecosystem that has never existed before.
This is a fun one to collect. Evening primrose. With the little tubes, remember? And then if you do like that, it all comes out. I love it.
If there is a vacant lot that has been taken over by weeds, that actually helps the environment. It helps pollinators, it purifies the air and absorbs stormwater.
It's contributing to human mental health, even if it's subliminal. People walk by a vacant lot, they think they didn't experience nature, but there have been some studies that show that pulse rate drops and kind of other things that are associated with perhaps going for a walk and what you do conceive of as nature still happen, even if you think you just saw this, degraded empty lot.
Oh, there's another one that's wrapped like that. Huh. This is a weird landscape.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and this is tomato. Is it?
I mean, it looks kind of like tomato.
That is. Those are little green tomatoes. This is nuts. Look how much. It's the Meadowlands mutant tomato.
So it's definitely a relation.
And the fact that we saw one here last year that was like obviously a domestic
Yeah.
tomato. And then there's this mutant. It's sprawling all the way down there.
It's all over the place. But it's really different.
Nothing is perfectly adapted to live there, so why not take the stuff that shows up and thrives?
Not to mention climate change, you need plants that can handle.
They can handle it.
Oh, wait. Here it is. Why the hell is it here and not other places?
There's also this huge question around plants and reproduction because they're fascinating beings and that they can hybridize very readily. So I was talking to an ecologist recently who was looking at this native plant that was thriving and hadn't been doing well like 15 years before, and she's like, well, I'm excited that it's doing well. I'm guessing it's hybridized as a new one. But she says, like, if we tested its DNA and told the nativists, so the people who are more native plants have told them it's a hybrid, they'd be like, it's not pure. We don't want it. They use terminology that you would associate with miscegenation or with eugenics, and a lot of the language around plants.
It's like this weird nostalgia.
For some fixed point in the past that is not agreed upon, and actually never was a fixed point. It was like a moment in time. I think the end goal is to not have a a seed library like this have to be an art project. That we're artists, that's the context we work in. But it's also functional, so it's both poetic and functional, and we feel like, there's some poetry or some kind of metaphoric meaning in taking this disused, unwanted stuff and turning it into an art object. And you're welcome to take your seed packet home and hang on the wall, but we would also encourage people to, look at places in their neighborhood that don't have plants growing in them and know that the seeds in that seed packet are the kind of seeds that will be able to survive in an environment. Spontaneous urban plants or plants growing in areas impacted.
Right, we're not just going to go in and make a forest with plants.
So that gives you a little taste of one of the landscapes we collect in a lot, which is Snake Hill in New Jersey. If you've driven by that big rock promontory.
In Secaucus.
Secaucus. Okay. So that gives you a little bit of a background introduction. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of our recent activities. Lots of reasons to collect seeds. One more that wasn't mentioned is that they're actually beautiful. This is a scanning electron microscope image of Asiatic dayflower seed, so it's actually very sculptural, and we're fascinated by this beautiful little thing that's the size of like the head of a pin and actually contains all this genetic information. It's like a little library in and of itself to start the next generation of plants. And as plants are rapidly evolving in response to climate change, these seeds hold the kind of tail of that change. So as was mentioned in the video, we're not quite there yet. One thing that's been interesting to observe as we've started paying attention to seeds is that they can actually stay viable for a lot longer than was previously thought. So there's been some discoveries about plants or seeds that were 2,000 years old or 32,000 years old being revived. Certainly not the case with all the plants in our library. But we're experimenting to see how long they can be saved. There's not a lot of knowledge about a lot of these seeds since they are undervalued. So this is an image of Svalbard, the seed vault, kind of doomsday seed vault in northern Norway, where agricultural crops are being saved for reseeding the landscape after some kind of apocalyptic situation. And then on the other side of the kind of spectrum of seed saving is community seed saving, or swaps, where people are taking stuff from their backyard or their community garden and sharing it kind of year after year. And these are typically like open pollination seeds, meaning that they're not genetically engineered or hybridized such that they won't reproduce. So it kind of gets you free of needing to go back to the corporation and buy again and again your seeds because they don't reproduce themselves. So we're interested in kind of the gap between those two. We save seeds, we're interested in storing them long term. We also accept seeds, but the difference is just the type of seeds that we save. So this is the meadowlands where you saw us collecting. It was kind of described in the video. Basically, what's growing here now is not what was growing there 400 years ago, but those plants can't grow there anymore because of what we've done to it. So these plants become kind of the de facto new natives of this extremely changed landscape. And they're super adaptable, right? So this is a plant growing in the bottom of like a 6-foot ditch and somehow managing to eke out a living. This is Ailanthus, which is widely hated, but has some good characteristics depending on where it's growing. So we're really interested in context. Like, this plant is not great everywhere, but in some contexts it works really well. It's able to hold soil in places where there's just rubble and there's no nutrition and the soil's just gonna wash away and go into a river system. Ailanthus can kind of spring up and hold things down. And often municipalities aren't capable of providing those services. Certainly in Bushwick, where I've lived did live for years, we didn't have much urban green space and not a lot of resources to do that kind of greening. So yes, they can be problematic. We've got like kudzu swamping the south, but that's a very specific example, so we want to look more carefully at each particular plant rather than just assuming all of them are problematic. Plants helping out, I would say, by providing some cracks in the pavement so that the water can seep down rather than running into our combined sewer system and creating an overflow and contamination in our water. More often than not, these plants are treated as a kind of green, undifferentiated mass, cut down for the sake of neatness, and also safety, of course. So we're interested in kind of the balance between wildness and looseness and safety and making a habitable space for humans and plants. And another thing that's been interesting in Brooklyn over the past 10 years is that these plants actually seem to be kind of endangered, like certainly not out here in Patterson or in Wayne, but in really rapidly gentrifying areas, these vacant lots are disappearing at a really rapid rate, and they're not being replaced with green space. They're being replaced with parking lots and condos. So there we're actually saving plants that are kind of in a threat zone. And I'm gonna hand it off to Anne.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you about the Next Epoch Seed Library's activities and processes in more detail. So first we find an interesting place that's been affected by human activity. For example, a highway median, an overgrown parking lot, a soccer field full of dandelions, under an elevated highway, or a vacant lot. And these places I would call junk space, and that's a place that is overlooked, unused, untended, and thus hosts to numerous extraordinary possibilities. A place where artifacts accumulate, weeds grow, and history is most visible. So we collect seeds. Most plants produce seeds in the fall and early winter, but there are many that are still hanging on in the winter, and seeds that are coming at all times of year, even spring. It's best not to collect the seeds too early from the plant because they might still be reaching maturity, but you can tell when the seeds are ready to collect by just touching them a little bit, and if they drop off easily, that means that they're ready. Let's see. So we note this date, location, and try to ID the species when we're collecting seeds. And we may or may not separate the seeds from any chaff or husks and pack them into small envelopes with ID tags. We've created a set of icons to describe the plant uses and possible dangers to humans and roles in their ecosystems. And the icons could be applicable to different parts of the same plant. For example, there might be a plant whose roots are edible, but the leaves are poisonous, or medicinal, or it can be eaten if it's boiled twice. So if you, on our table out in the ballroom, if you see conflicting icons, that might be why. So these seed packets become part of our library collection. It's available to be added to or withdrawn from by anyone, and it can be done in person in one of our exhibitions. We had a show in the Ben Cheng Gallery last year, or by mail anytime. In an art context, they function as multiples, so they'd fall in the book art tradition, but they're really meant to be planted. The idea in a normal seed library is that you withdraw seeds from the library and plant them, and when the plant grows and matures, you collect the seeds from the plant and deposit them back into the library. And let's see, so our exhibitions have ranged from very small to very large. For each new exhibition, we try to create a special collection of seeds from that immediate area. The seed library structure is also very adaptable. This is the No Longer Empty show in the Bronx, probably about a year and a half ago. We installed a small set of drawers into a steel I-beam in the raw exhibition space. This is the show we had here about a year ago in the Ben Cheng Gallery, where we took over an entire room. We had a seed sorting and seed propagation area with live plants, a sitting and reading area with a bulletin board for contributions and maps, and the enlarged microscope photos of seeds, one of which you saw earlier. Here's some more pictures of the same thing, site photos, a little video. And here's some photos of some workshops that we've done. And this is just recent activities.
Yeah, we worked with a larger collective called Chance Ecologies that's interested in the same kind of territories, and did a workshop with them in the Queens Museum. This was at our Brooklyn Superfund site, the Newtown Creek. Gathered seeds there. We had our winter headquarters at Wave Hill, which is a botanic, well, not really a botanic garden, a community garden and cultural center, I think they call it. And while we were there, we did a bunch of activities, a lot of seed packaging and sorting. We had a couple public events where we made garlic mustard pesto. If anyone's interested in that, there's lots around, and we're happy to tell you how to do it. It's delicious. We hosted the larger Chance Ecologies group in our space and had a discussion. And then we did a lot of seed testing. It was the first chance for us to test the viability of the seeds we've been gathering for a couple years. So that was pretty exciting. Like they did really well, and I think it was like we tested like 30 varieties, and like 27 or so came up. So the seeds we're saving can be saved. There's different techniques to propagate them, and we're kind of gathering that material and trying to make it accessible to folks. And then we just wrapped up an exhibition. We took those plants to the Index Art Center in Newark. And you want to take over and talk about this show?
Sure. So the seeds that we started in Wave Hill at the beginning of January, we then moved them to the Index Art Center. So this was in basically the month of March, and they grew a lot during that time. Here's a closer picture from the beginning of the show. One of the plants that did really well was the morning glories that flowered while we were there for the first time, which was really exciting. And they kind of grew here. In this picture, you can see that we have a grow light hung just above the plants, and the morning glories grew up to the grow light, and then they wrapped around the grow light and started growing up the chains that were holding the grow light from the ceiling. And here's a picture of us maybe like a week ago with the huge plants. Here's people interacting with the library and the display vitrine. We have a lot of similar stuff at our table.
I included this image partially because we have done a little bit of work with kids. I did a workshop with 5th graders recently that was a lot of fun. We planted seeds and talked to them about how plants and weeds specifically function in their neighborhood. Are they kind of enemies or friends, and in what context? So it was really fun seeing kids coming to this show and being interested. So one thing we're working on is a curriculum development kit, kind of in dialogue potentially with a few schools that might want to have materials in order to kind of collect in their own neighborhoods and try sprouting stuff. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, we have one more video.
And we just have a video that we'll play while we take some questions. I think that'll start it. This is just kind of the habitats we collect from, but there's no audio, so that's all. I don't know if there's supposed to be formal Q&A or not. We're happy to take it if anyone has any, but otherwise we're out there and you can come talk to us individually. Yes? What's the name of the lecture again? The project is the Next Epoch Seed Library.
Thank you.
Yep.
I saw you guys, I think last Green Fair, last year in the atrium. You guys were talking about how you make paint out of like the seeds and stuff like that. Is that still something you guys do?
You might have seen us when we were doing our exhibition at the gallery. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a kind of a thing that fits in nicely with the seed library is, you know, if you gather seeds when they're in berry form and they have a bright color, grind it up, add a little gum arabic, which is the base for watercolor paints, and then, yeah, you've got a paint. So that's another nice way for people to interact with plants. Like, that's one of our main goals, is just to get people looking at plants, differentiating between the different species, and appreciating them differently. Yeah.
Have you ever tried using the pigment for cloth, like dye?
Haven't done it yet, but we know people do, and when we talk about the paint, we usually get a dyer telling us something, so we're hoping to, you know, apprentice with a dyer or something sometime. Do you know anything about it?
Not
Yeah, just curious. Yeah. Okay. thank you. We'll see you
Thank
back over
you.
there.